Thank you very much for giving me the time to talk with you all today. Firstly, I need to make a very humble apology. I feel a little bit like one of those award winners at the Golden Globes when they send a friend, but unfortunately I'm not able to be here in person today. Sadly, I have a personal commitment that I could not exit. But I hope, from what I've provided for you today, that you get a real understanding about where my position is on the democratizing of clinical research. And I want to point out this is very much a personal and a pragmatic perspective. So thank you for your time, and let's move on. So, why do I care about democratizing clinical trials? Well, firstly, let's look at the personal side. As you can see from the photograph, and I want to point out this is obviously a pre-pandemic photograph because there is so much more of me to share these days. But I am male, I'm white, I'm middle-aged, I'm middle class. Can you tell by my accent, I am very English, I'm university educated, and I am a white-collar worker. And all of those things together mean I have super easy access to clinical trials if I need to get involved in one, or any of my family does. The nature of my job means that I am really accessible to trials. I can take the time to go to hospitals, to have visits, to reschedule my activities around the research work that's happening and the care that I would be given. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I have easy access to clinical trials. So I have great privilege to be able to do so. The reason I'm really interested in it comes from my background. So my parents were very working class. We lived in council or state housing. We were a low-income household. My father was a shop floor worker at a car manufacturing plant, and my mum was a school cleaner. She cleaned classrooms before school and after school. Both of their educations ended at the latest in their early teens, and they had limited access to travel and information and lots of other things. So as a child, I would have had no or very limited access to a clinical trial. They wouldn't even know what a clinical trial was. And that's really, really important to me, because that would have put me at a disadvantage to my family now. So from a human perspective, I really want everyone to have as great an access to new medicines as physically possible, and to be involved in clinical research as much as we possibly can be. I've now been involved in clinical research for 21 years, and I've been working in the healthcare systems, both as a purchaser of trials, in pharma, in biotech, and in medical devices and surgical equipment for a further 13 years. So I've had a lot of exposure to this process and this system. So that's the personal perspective. That's the emotional bit. Well, what's the pragmatic reason? To deliver new medicines efficiently, we really need to be able to get hold of and work with as many patients as we possibly can. And therefore we need to make the availability and the access as simple and easy as we can. I won't give you many stats in this, but there's a couple of really interesting ones that I know they've been around for a long time, but I always think they're really worth remembering. But for every 100 patients identified, we probably only get 7 complete a clinical trial. And of those that are randomised, the best part of 20% are going to drop out early. And they tend to drop out because it's onerous, it's difficult to get to, they didn't know what they were signing up for really, as well as, it might not work anyway. But certainly those first 3 are quite significant factors. And so what that means for the pharmaceutical industry and the biopharma industry is that the focus has moved on to areas that are more likely to provide a return on their investment, where they can show an increase in the product's net present value as rapidly as possible, and therefore they need to have those studies driving patients into them, and therefore where they can show that recruitment and retention will be most easily managed. And then the graph that you see in front of you there is really just looking at the impact on clinical trials in the paediatric space over the last few years. And it's just diminishing, which is bizarre when you consider that our regulations are really saying we need to get children more involved in studies for the licenses to include children. So we're kind of pushing back against the difficult options, and therefore a lot of these individuals are not getting access to the research that I think they deserve and should get. So, what's the key problem? Well, I personally think one of the major problems is that we haven't changed our models significantly. And irrespective about whether you look at the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 model, and whether you think we should be doing much more flexible clinical studies, the traditional site-based model has not changed forever. As an industry, we talk about patient centricity, but we've not really embraced it across the board pre-COVID, and that's the caveat on this. Okay, so let's look at the traditional site solution. If you look at the imagery on the right-hand side of the slide, the squares, the green squares, represent patients that are involved or available to be involved in a clinical study. And so we can see two sites represented by those circles, those hospital symbols, that have a recruitment area that each provide 2 patients. The third site, you can see, isn't involved in the clinical study, therefore those patients that could be involved are not involved because they're not part of that study group at the moment. So the traditional site model says if a site isn't participating, their patients can't participate and therefore receive the medicines. Sites only recruit patients who go to the site often, so therefore you're reducing your geographical spread. Most patients, you can see, cannot take part. The impact on any patient's life is high, so recruitment is low and retention is poor. And site management costs, therefore, become higher because we need to add sites to get more patients. And that penultimate bullet point goes back to my familial history, which is we could not have gone because we could not have afforded to be part of a clinical trial from a centre of excellence that wasn't on our doorstep. So our traditional answer to recruitment's not very good is let's throw some more sites into the mix, let's throw some more countries, so long as they're easy to deal with. So let's decentralise the clinical trials. And that's the solution that my organisation, and I work for MRN, and we're the leading provider of and designer of decentralised clinical trial solutions. That we've been doing that now for 15 years, so I'll hold my hand up and say I do have a degree of vested interest in this. Excuse me. But no matter what flavour of decentralised trial you think of, and there are multiple variants available at the moment, moving as much of the protocol into the remit of the patient, into their home, their community, wherever, makes a huge degree of logical sense. And having clinical trial medical professionals working in the field with those patients does make a significant impact both on recruitment and retention rates, and we have seen this over the last 15 years. So if we look at our image again, what we're seeing now is that patients from further away can participate, and that's shown by those orange lines now coming into play. And the key opinion leaders will develop more strongly, because patients that are distant can now take part in their studies, therefore they can get more into their hopper, as it were, their screening systems, so they're more likely to find the patient numbers that they require. And what you'll see as well is you might get sites referring patients when they're not involved in studies to studies. So those patients who are non-native will start getting access to the studies being run by other centres. Now what that might mean is you end up with fewer sites but with more patients per site. But that's got to be a really positive move, because now patients are going to be able to exercise their choices. Will I take part, and where should I take part? Where does it make sense for me to take part? But it's not just about the geography, and this is the democratization of clinical research, because other patients will take part. Because we have now the ability to reach out to a greater number of people through social media and other forms of patient support groups, other medical professionals, whatever, patients from other communities that may be less well served by healthcare can now participate. Maybe they are in more disadvantaged communities. Patients that aren't able to take time off work or school, as my parents couldn't have done with me if I was involved when I was younger. Patients with carers that don't have the ability to transport them. Patients that don't have the ability to navigate the world quite as well for mental health or physical health reasons can now participate more. Patients from communities that have less access or less likely to use the current healthcare infrastructure systems, for whatever reason that may be, now have the ability to have that trial brought to them. And if you think of children, I wrote a piece recently, and one of the things that I stated is hospitals are scary places no matter how much we try and make them pretty for patients, for children particularly. And therefore, if you can do things in a safer environment, in an environment which makes them feel more comfortable, then it takes a degree of stress out of the whole system. And then we come to what I think is the crux of the matter. Because we can get more people from more places, from more socioeconomic groups, we're going to get a broader and deeper access to patient groups. And that is democratization of clinical research. And that makes your data and your results so much more meaningful than just getting white Anglo-Saxon Protestants like me involved. And all of that, if you are just looking at pounds, shillings and pence, has to help pharma by being more efficient, because we can increase recruitment, we can increase retention, and therefore we can get product to the market faster. So are we seeing real research? Are we seeing real change? Yeah, for the most part, I think yes. And it was COVID that forced the industry to look at DCT as a genuine solution. I think some will do so for the duration of the pandemic. Some have used DCT as an insurance policy. But I think many now are really looking at significant change to the design of their protocols. Because if you don't design the protocol around having DCT in it, it becomes quite an expensive option. And if we look at the amount of protocols that have DCT in some form or other mentioned within their protocol design, and that's where the table, the graph comes from, you can see that it's started to grow. I mean, this does not include obviously all those that have had it added on. But as of the end of Q1 this year, at least 50 studies that we could see relatively easily had already put DCT at the front end of their protocol design. So we're looking at doubling the number of studies this year that will be based around DCT. There are some caveats to this. It's not easy. It's not simple. You are moving large chunk of the hospital into the patient's home. It's not cheap. But designing it into the protocol drives that cost down. And it is not a panacea. It will not work for everything. It really won't. It's working for more and more areas, but it won't work for every part of a study, and it won't work for every study. And it's not a simple technology solution. You know, it's not Zoom for doctors. It really does need infrastructure on the ground. It needs people to visit the patient. It needs people to be trained and skilled enough to be able to do a lot of the elements in the home and take centrifuges in and manage drug delivery to the patient and to blind product on site if required and to get and. There's a whole load of pieces that sit within this. And then for it to work really, really well, it needs communication and awareness across sites, especially with those that aren't involved in clinical trials at the moment. But the benefits are proving to be enormous. I think for patients, what it does is it allows more and more patients to be able to be involved in clinical research and therefore be able to get access to medicines they would not have been able to get hold of before. I think it's advantageous to drug developers because they're seeing recruitment and retention rates increase. Drug trials speed up, and I think it's going to have a fundamental impact on how we do trials. And finally, to investigators, it's going to show for investigators that they can get access to more patients, and therefore their research can be more engaging and deliver more benefits to their patients. Because I do believe that investigators aren't investigators first and foremost. They are medics, they are treating patients. And therefore the benefit to the patient has to come first. And if they can get more patients to get benefit from being involved in clinical trials, then it is a massive win-win situation. As I said, this is a personal view. I hope that in the very short time we've been talking that you've enjoyed what I've had to say. Please, by all means, reach out to me and discuss. I apologise I'm not there in person, but I hope you can reach out and talk to me. My details are available, and thank you ever so much for listening to me and the MRM. Thank you.